What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a build video for The Outer Worlds 2, which just recently released into its early access period, but officially releases on the 29th. And after reviewing it and having fun with it and talking about all the various builds and things you could do in terms of making characters in this game, I thought it would be fun to share what was effectively my first run, and what was, I would say, probably the most fun build I had playing through with this, specifically because it was just kind of more focused on the roleplay experience and how I could turn something like silly into something viable. And that's probably a good place to start this video, because I would not consider this like a build I would use for the very hard difficulty setting or anything like that. Rather, this was just focused on being a fun way to play the game, not the most effective way to play the game. In fact, on my own run through very hard, I actually used a more traditional stealth sniper type character, or a stealth archer if you prefer, because with something like 1000% potential extra damage to sneak attacks, that is going to be infinitely more effective and easier to play than this. But this character was a lot of very silly fun, because I made what I like to refer to as a dumb professor or an idiot savant who could make use of those things both in dialogue and slightly more social situations, but then in combat could rush in guns blazing in a manner that can only be described as not intelligent, and making use of some mechanics to make all of that work. So hopefully somebody finds this as enjoyable as I did, but like I said, it was a lot of fun playing through this one. As with most builds, this of course starts in character creation though, where we are going to take the professor background. This is mostly going to be a roleplay option. It's going to come up in dialogues a lot, but it's going to play into what we're going to do next for traits, which is pick up Brilliant as our main one, and then we're going to need to pick up a second one so we can pick up the dumb negative trait. Now, I personally like to pick up Witty because I felt it was sort of thematic to how nonsensical this was, but realistically, that second positive trait is really up to you. For the negative trait, though, we are going to pick up Dumb. This is for a couple of reasons, but in addition to getting regular dumb dialogue, there are also unique lines specifically when you have Brilliant and Dumb, and this will of course let you see that. Now, the catch to Dumb, however, though, is that when we get to picking our skills, you have to pick 5 of them to lock off that you will never be able to raise. Honestly, which ones you want to lock off is mostly up to you outside of guns, science, and medical. We're going to need all of those to make this work, but the rest of them you can pick and choose at your leisure, but seeing how you can only max out like 3 skills anyway, as long as you'll be able to level up guns, medical, and science, you'll be good to go. With that in mind, on our way up to the level cap of 30, what I liked to do was put a point in guns every level, and then splitting the other point, you get 2 per level up, in science or medical accordingly as I went. Every other level, though, you're going to get a perk. Now, it is important that I mention, however, that this is also a character that I chose to take the flawed flaw with, which basically forces you to take every flaw but gives you extra perks. So what you're seeing on this list is more than you would have normally. But really the goal here is basically to pick the perks that are going to lean into medical, science, and guns accordingly, because this is going to let us do things like mess around with how the medical inhaler works, give us more and better damage with a variety of different weapons, and then science has a lot of interesting ones that can do things like recharge your gadgets, which can let you slow time via tactical time dilation, or even add extra damage. So with that in mind, I'm going to go over some of the most important ones, but it is worth a mention that when we're talking about the gun perks in particular, those perks tend to only apply to select versions of weapons. I was rotating a lot of weapons in and out because that's what I enjoyed doing, but if you plan on sticking to like a specific weapon or something like that, you may want to, adjust accordingly. But I picked up Point Blank Artist. This gives us more damage near to enemies when we are using shotguns, SMGs, or pistols. In the beginning, I used a machine pistol a lot, and honestly, shotguns have their moment as well. I also picked up Rapid Recharge. When you use up all of your gadget energy, you get a really big boost to its regeneration for a few seconds, which lets you make more use of things like tactical time dilation. Ninja can be super helpful because we're going to be running into the thick of combat a lot, and this increases your evasion based on the type of armor you're wearing. What that means is your percent chance to just ignore damage every once in a while goes up, so that's helpful if you're trying to survive a little bit. Trophy Hunter gives you extra crit chance based on whether you're fighting regular or strong enemies. That can be helpful. Crabble Rancher takes marksman rifles, pistols, and shotguns and allows them to deal extra damage and crit chance. Serendipitous Slayer gives you extra crit chance for pistols and SMGs, but also, when you critically hit with those weapons, refills a portion of your magazine. Now, I did notice that this may be a little bit bugged. I noticed that it was doing that even when I wasn't using those weapon types, so probably worth a note. Deep Drums just increases your magazine size. That, in combination with a perk you can get, can double the amount of ammo that you put into a weapon, which combined with Serendipitous Slayer can give you an almost sort of infinitely automatically reloading weapon. Gunrunner's a good one. We're going to be up and running around a lot. This reduces your ranged weapon spread, making you more accurate, while also reducing the movement penalty's accuracy as well. Inhaler Overload is a great one if you want to lean into the medical inhaler, because it allows you to take a deep breath of your inhaler as opposed to the normal use, which when you do this will give you extra damage, armor rating, evasion, and movement speed. A really great one if you want to lean into that fully. However, using the medical inhaler puts you at risk of toxicity or xyranium poisoning, depending on like the primers and things that you've added to it. And so xyranium absorption can, at the end of a crash, just reduce the xyranium poisoning automatically, which can be helpful. Slow More is pretty straightforward. We can use tactical time dilation to get extra evasion chance and get energy back for doing so. Crash Recovery is another great one for this build, because if you're crashing a lot via the medical inhaler, you can just regenerate health passively, and normally what crashing does is prevents you from healing again, so this kind of just lets you crash and heal. Eden Windage gives marksman rifles, pistols, and sniper rifles extra range and damage to weak spots. Hail of Lead is especially useful because this allows you to, when using automatic or burst fire weapons, to get extra damage per shot, stacking up to a potential 100%, and against big tanky enemies, an automatic weapon will just delete them with this perk. Very, very useful. Lasting High, another one that lets you lean into the medical inhaler by allowing you to actually use it again to heal while crashing, which you can't normally, at a reduced rate. Now at Max Science, you can pick up Enradiator. This is just a straight up damage buff with Enray type damage. Very useful in the late game for just adding extra damage. And then Xyranium Powered allows you to get extra energy based on the amount of Xyranium poisoning you have, just again letting you play around with a lot of the various little bits and bobs there. Now there are a few other perks here that I took but didn't really necessarily have a use for, and was just kind of messing around. Now I did mention a little bit about flaws, specifically that this is the character that I took the flawed flaw with, but there's really only a couple you would maybe consider otherwise if you don't want to do that, and those are Overprepared, which gives you extra magazine size so long as you are reloading your weapon before it hits empty, which a perk like Serendipitous Slayer will help with. However, if you ever let it run empty, you get a big damage debuff for a while. Teetotaler allows us to get extra toxicity and health regained from our medical inhaler, allowing us to heal more but also crash more often, which is kind of what we want in this case. And then for this build specifically, the other one that I would consider is actually Reckless Leadership, because the sort of idea here is that we're running into combat blind and being very irresponsible, and this allows us to effectively make our companions do that as well, because when one dies, the other one gets fully healed and gets their ability back, which can help you deal some extra damage, which is a lot of fun, but, do be careful. Not being able to revive them sometimes can be a bit of a pain. Now, that brings us to items. So early on in the first zone, Paradise Island, where you find the companion Inez, I believe, you can also pick up Malpractice, which is a helmet that gives you extra damage while crashing and extra damage on top of that based on your medical skill. So if you want to lean into the crashing aspect of this helmet is fantastic for that. For our body armor, I picked up Calorie Counter. This reduces some healing from the inhaler, but using it grants us a big boost to our energy gain, which lets you, again, use tactical time dilation a lot. Plus, I also thought this armor looked sick as hell, so there's that. And that's what I chose to use armor-wise. There's not really a wrong answer here, though. You can use most anything that's just going to reduce incoming damage or lean into your build. In terms of weapons, though, in the early game, I mostly used a machine pistol because they're relatively easy to get your hands on, and in the beginning of the game, that can be super helpful. Now, as time progresses here, there's a variety of different weapons you can use. In particular, I really liked the Chain Spark Cannon that drops from the boss of the first major area. There's also the Simplifier if you want to go the marksman rifle route. This is a rifle that you'll get as part of the main story. If you're paying attention, it's essentially impossible to miss. And then there's also a rifle called the Oracle that you can get at the end of the Golden Ridge area, which will have a modifier on it that lets it lock onto targets and like guarantee that your bullet will hit them even if you're not aiming directly at them. That one's pretty useful for this as well. And then last but not least, towards the very end of the game, in a scrapper camp on the planet Praetor, we can find a lockbox. These lockboxes can be opened on your ship by finding decryption keys via exploration or buying them from vendors on occasion. The one you get from this scrapper camp contains an item known as the Bullet Blender. The Bullet Blender takes all types of bullets and uses them as ammo and thus does not need to be reloaded ever. And if you're looking for fun, crazy nonsense at the end of the game, I think the Bullet Blender should probably be your end goal for this. However, on top of all of those items, because we're leaning into the science skills specifically, a lot of the science weapons and armors will also work for this, such as the Xyranium mech suit, which will let you hover via gadget energy. And while hovering, you are effectively immune to death, but gain Xyranium poisoning instead, which will then feed back into the energy output as an example. So that item is also perfectly viable for this and may well be a great way to go here actually. So you have options basically is what I'm getting at, and it's not like wildly important. You stick to all this stuff. But in addition to all the ways this works out in combat, as a little reminder, the nice thing about all of the perks we've picked up in our background, you know, Professor, Brilliant, Dumb, all that stuff, it's going to give us a ton of dialogue options, both unique stuff that allows you to sort of interact and role play as this hyper-specialized professor who knows a lot about like one thing, but is otherwise a very unintelligent individual. And that is important because that's kind of how it reflects combat and how I chose to go about that. So my goal for combat was basically to just run in guns blazing, using our addiction to the medical inhaler to potentially trigger crashing and also recover our health, while all of our perks and everything give us a giant magazine size that pretty much refills on its own, allowing us to take enemies head on. Now, in certain situations where you're facing a ton of enemies, especially if you're trying to play this on a harder difficulty, it's a very high risk, high reward type of play style where you can definitely get destroyed very quickly if you're not paying attention or you mess something up. But with things like our vastly increased energy meter, allowing us to trigger time dilation or any of our other gadgets pretty much at will and make extensive use of them, if you, somewhat counter to the name of the build, play this smart, it can be extremely effective in combat, even if it's not, you know, perhaps the most efficient way of doing things, which is why I think I wound up having so much fun with this one. Now, just as a little aside, especially in the early game, you may find yourself kind of relying on companions to draw some of the heat away from you before you get a lot of this going, especially. And Niles and his ability to taunt enemies away from you, and actually the Valerie unit, who can act as a healer in combat as well, much better than Inez, actually, who is a combat medic, can help you out with early game survivability a lot. But other than that, the combat strategy is very straightforward. Run in, shoot everything that moves, try not to die. Use your gadgets, maybe trigger crashing. And while it's simple, it's very high intensity because there's just a lot of stuff all at once happening pretty much all the time. But when you put all of that together, I think this build really embodies one of the taglines for the game, and that the universe needs a hero, and unfortunately you're going to have to do. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do wind up using this build, I'd love to hear what you think about it down in the comment section below, which naturally does mean to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.